Near the mountains, a woman is driving her car behind a big truck. She keeps honking to make it move, but the truck ignores her. The woman decides to drive around it, only to discover there's another truck coming on the opposite side. It hits her car and pushes it toward the middle of the road, where the other truck crashes into it and destroys it. Meanwhile, John and his wife Denise are watching TV in bed. Suddenly John hears a noise and rushes outside to discover that Denise's car is being seized by the bank because he's behind on his payments. John's protests are ignored and the employee just takes the car away. During breakfast, the couple argues about the situation. John swears he talked to the bank, but that was 2 months ago. Denise wants him to do something, but John's hours keep getting cut at the factory. He's trying his best to find a second job. Afterward, John drops his son Mike at school. Mike reminds his dad not to say goodbye because it's sad. He prefers "see you later." After a long day at the factory, John and his friend Jimmy go to a job interview at an important company. Jimmy thinks it's all for show because the only people who get positions in places like these are the workers' relatives. The manager is very impressed by John's resume, but just like Jimmy predicted, he turns John down for being overqualified. On Sunday, the family goes to Mike's baseball game. Everyone is having a great time when suddenly, Mike feels dizzy and collapses. His parents rush to his side, but Mike is non-responsive. At the hospital, the doctors immediately give Mike a mask to help him breathe. Denise is losing her mind, so a nurse takes the parents aside to make them fill out the paperwork so the doctors can work in peace. Later, the doctor explains that Mike's blood pressure is low and it continues to drop. He'll have heart failure. The couple is then taken to an office to have a meeting with Director Rebecca and Dr. Turner, the head of cardiology. Turner shows them x-rays comparing a normal child's heart and Mike's, pointing out the septal defects that have caused Mike's heart to be 3 times larger than normal. This means he's not getting enough blood pumped and it backs up in the lungs. At this stage, there's no corrective surgery they can do. Mike clearly needs a heart transplant. The other option is medicating him every day, but his quality of life would be poor and he'd just wake up dead someday anyway. Rebecca explains that transplantation is a high-risk operation, so Mike could die on the table. The boy only has a few weeks left to live, perhaps only days, so she thinks the family may want to make it a happy time as a goodbye. As Denise has a breakdown, John tells them that he wants Mike to have the surgery. Turner wants to put Mike on the organ recipient list, saying that since Mike is B positive he'll go to the top of the list. However, Rebecca stops him, pointing out that first they need to discuss payment. John reminds her he has insurance, but Rebecca has already checked and his policy doesn't cover procedures of this magnitude. Denise doesn't have benefits at her job, and the couple doesn't own their home or other investments. This means the hospital will have to treat this as a cash account, meaning that the transplant will cost $250,000. Hospital policy demands 30% to be paid in advance to put the patient's name on the receiver's list. On their way out, the couple is approached by another doctor, who has heard they're taking Mike to a county hospital. She explains that heart transplantation is an elective procedure, so a county hospital isn't obliged to help them. The doctor tells them to talk to their insurance company or ask for help at places like the hospital's Human Resources Department, Children's State Services, and Medicaid. The next day at the factory, John talks to the head of Human Resources and learns that the company has switched carriers. They've acquired a less expensive policy that has many restrictions. Since John's hours were cut, he only counts as a part-time employee, therefore he isn't eligible for full coverage. John explains the urgent situation, but the man says there's nothing he can do. He advises John to file an appeal, which takes about 7 working days. After filling up lots of paperwork for the insurance company, John and Denise go to Children's State Services. However, since they already have insurance, they both have jobs, and they're not on welfare, they're not eligible. The couple goes from office to office, filling too much paperwork and being dragged around like cattle, only to be told over and over that they aren't poor enough. Eventually John gets his appeal approved and he excitedly goes to see Rebecca. However, she explains that appeals are for already existing claims, and what he needs to file is a grievance. He has to resubmit the paperwork, which may take up to 30 days. Afterward, John and Denise begin borrowing money from friends and selling their possessions. Some neighbors know they're desperate and take advantage to buy their things for just a few bucks. They regularly visit Mike at the hospital and try to keep him in a good mood not to stress his heart more. Sometimes it's hard to be at the hospital because they can see patients dying in other rooms. One day, Jimmy tells John he should try to get his story on the news. John goes to the TV station and talks to a reporter, who expresses interest in his case. However, he needs to get authorization from the higher-ups first. As time passes, John is forced to sell important things, like his car and his wedding ring. But it's still not enough. One morning, Denise calls John from the hospital to inform him that Turner will be releasing Mike even though John left a bit of money to keep the room. She yells at him, asking him to do something. After considering all his options, John goes to the hospital and talks to Turner in private. They argue for several minutes and Turner still refuses to help. Suddenly, John pushes Turner into another room and pulls out a gun before throwing Turner against the wall. He announces he isn't playing nice anymore and Turner has no choice but to agree to help. John chains up the door and keeps the doctor moving. When they find the guard Max, John threatens to use his gun. Max isn't armed, so he gets out of the way. After chaining up another door, they go to the main area and everyone immediately panics when they see that John has a gun. The crowd runs to leave the room, so John rushes to close the door before losing everyone. There are a few hostages who are patients with an urgent need for attention, so John asks a doctor to take care of them. Next, John destroys a security camera and forces Max to kill the power on all elevators. The guard in the surveillance room notices this and calls the cops. When the phone rings, John takes the call and tells the person that the hospital is closed for repairs, so they should go to another place. Lots of people in the waiting room keep complaining and asking for medical attention, not to mention a baby keeps crying. John doesn't know how to convince them to be patient. At that moment, an ambulance arrives with a patient in critical condition because he got shot. John points his gun at the paramedics and makes them leave before opening the door to let the wounded man in. The doctors take him to the surgery room and Turner complains, saying he's a cardiac surgeon and not an emergency physician. John can't believe he refuses to help a dying man and forces him to do it anyway. Suddenly, John hears sirens and discovers that several police cars are surrounding the building. Lieutenant Frank puts everyone in position and is frustrated to learn that Rebecca isn't around just because it's Saturday. In the emergency room, the doctors take care of a pregnant woman next. Max's radio gets a message from Frank asking to talk to John. As soon as John takes the radio, Frank uses all his negotiation techniques, trying to seem friendly and helpful. John can tell Frank is trying to emotionally manipulate him and shares his demands. He wants the cops to find Rebecca and put Mike's name on the waiting list. Frank promises to do something, but John doesn't have faith in him and hangs up. Afterward, John talks to the patients and sympathizes with the guy waiting for his baby to be born. There's also Mitch, who swears that he and his girlfriend Julie were in a car accident, but the details of his story don't make sense. Lester concludes that Mitch beat up Julie, so Mitch excuses himself by saying he was drunk. Then Turner finishes operating on the shot man, confirming he's safe now. While John isn't looking, Mitch scolds Max for doing nothing before stealing a scalpel and a spray. In Mike's room, Denise watches a doctor inject the boy with many different medicines. It's a lot for a child, but he needs them all to stay alive a little longer. Mike complains about the pain, so the doctor distracts him with an action figure. In the neighboring room, a woman has a breakdown because her child has died. A crowd gathers outside the hospital, full of curious civilians and reporters who want to interview the cops. Chief Gus arrives and has an argument with Frank for not taking care of this faster. Gus gets a call from the mayor and promises to meet him soon. In the emergency room, John lets all the hostages have a snack from the machines. He wonders why Mike's problem wasn't found sooner, since he had checkups every year since he was born. A doctor reveals that the insurance companies bribe doctors not to run tests to keep costs down. Turner tries to play dumb, but the other doctor keeps going, explaining that the law only expects them to stabilize patients. Anything else isn't obligatory, so the staff is off the hook. The patients complain about the system and yell at Turner, who tries to remind them that John is the one with the gun to get them off his back. When John tries to make a call, he discovers that the lines have been intercepted, and no matter the number he uses, Frank will always pick up. Frank swears he's working on the list but wants John to let a few patients go as a sign of good faith. As Rebecca arrives and tells Frank about Mike's situation, a doctor tells John that the pregnant woman needs to be moved. This makes John agree to let some hostages go, but in exchange he wants results in an hour or he'll start shooting people. Then John announces that the pregnant woman and the mother with the baby can leave. Mitch insults a patient as a distraction, and when John comes closer to calm them down, Mitch uses the spray on his eyes before stabbing his shoulder with the scalpel. John headbutts him twice before they start fighting over the gun, which falls to the floor. Mitch asks Julie to grab it and shoot John, however Julie picks up the spray instead and uses it on Mitch's eyes before kicking him several times, crying as she complains about the way he beat her up. She even kicks him in the groin before announcing she won't be his Barbie anymore and taking off her wig. Everyone celebrates her bravery while John rushes to take the gun and borrows some handcuffs from Max. After cuffing Mitch to the radiator, John lets the mother with the baby and the pregnant woman with her husband leave. The crowd celebrates while the reporter who John visited the other day covers the incident, making sure to talk about Mike's situation. While the freed hostages tell the reporters that John treated them well, a news team realizes that the cops have access to the cameras in the hospital. Meanwhile, Gus and an officer try to talk to Rebecca. She doesn't show any guilt at all and explains that lots of parents go crazy like this every day. There's nothing she can do to change the rules. If people don't like it, they have to talk to the congressman. The officer points out that they could tell John that Mike is on the list without actually doing it. At that moment, the hospital's head of security arrives and tells the cops about a weak spot in the building ducts. Rebecca and Frank enter the ICU and find Denise to tell her what's happening. Denise swears her husband wouldn't hurt a fly and feels guilty because her yelling may have pushed him too far. When Frank starts asking questions, Denise realizes they want to use her to stop John and she refuses to cooperate. However, she changes her mind when Rebecca agrees to do the transplant for free, even hugging her in gratitude. On their way out, Frank congratulates Rebecca for her great acting. On TV, Jimmy appears to talk about the incident, explaining the terrible situation that thousands of people in the country are going through. He says that the system backed John into a corner. In the meantime, paramedics and firemen find the woman in the crashed car near the mountains and discover she's a donor. At the hospital, an officer tells Frank that they're sending a man inside through the ducts, hoping to get a clear shot. Frank rushes to yell at Gus for making plans behind his back, so Gus yells back saying that John will start killing people soon. However, the truth comes out when Gus accidentally mentions election year, making Frank realize he's doing everything to look good for the mayor. Caught red-handed, Gus takes Frank off the case. The head of security turns off the air conditioning and a sniper sneaks inside the air duct. At the same time, the reception phone rings and John picks up the call, shocked to hear Denise's voice. She tells him that Rebecca has put Mike on the list, but the boy isn't doing very well. A news van outside hacks into the cops' system and starts broadcasting the conversation on TV. Soon the hacker manages to get the security camera footage as well. Now the whole country can watch Denise hand the phone to Mike so he can talk to his father with a very weak voice. Rebecca is watching too and the guilt finally makes her cry. Since John is distracted, the sniper is able to come out of the duct through the ceiling and waits for John to move to the right spot to shoot. At that moment Lester notices that John is on TV and warns him. John sees the light behind him but doesn't move fast enough, so he gets shot in the shoulder. Suddenly the ceiling panel crumbles under the sniper's weight and he falls. John runs to catch him and beats him up. Seeing this on the cameras, Frank mocks Gus, who gets another call from the mayor because all this was shown on TV. While the doctors take care of John's injury, the cops find the hacker and end his connection to their footage. Civilians keep gathering outside the hospital and cheer for John every time they see him at the window. Meanwhile, a helicopter picks up the woman from the accident, and Rebecca is making some calls. John demands to talk to Frank, so Gus has no choice but to send him to the door. Then John comes with the sniper, who has been tied up and left in his underwear. He calls the cops out for lying and demands to see Mike, ignoring all of Frank's attempts to negotiate. If he gets Mike, then he'll let the sniper go. Since the crowd is on John's side, Gus and Frank give in to social pressure and agree to bring Mike over. The cops have to hold Denise back while the boy is taken from ICU to the emergency area. As soon as the stretcher is inside, John releases the sniper. After a checkup, Turner explains that Mike's heart rate is too low, so he needs a new heart or he'll die in the next few hours. John volunteers to self-delete so Mike can have his heart, but Turner refuses to do the transplant because dozens of tests are needed first to confirm compatibility. Without those, the risk is too high. Some of the hostages think John is being very noble while others think Mike wouldn't be happy to have his heart like this and say that John needs to let go. When John gets the gun ready, Turner realizes he can't let a heart go to waste and agrees to operate. In another hospital, the doctors are harvesting the organs of the woman from the car crash and confirm her blood type is B positive. Soon Rebecca gets a fax telling her of a potential donor and runs to find Denise. John finishes writing his will and needs 2 witnesses to sign it. Mitch and Lester refuse, saying they aren't going to support self-deletion. When John points out that signing will get their freedom faster, Max and Julie cooperate. The doctors get Mike ready for surgery, but first a crying John shares a few words with his son, reminding him to always be kind and good. Afterward, John takes out his gun and a bullet from his pocket, revealing that his weapon was empty the whole time and he never planned to hurt anybody. John gets ready to shoot, but he fails because the safety is on. He's about to try again when suddenly Denise contacts him on the radio, which he turns off. A desperate Denise runs to the door and screams. Minutes later, the helicopter arrives with the heart and 4 hostages are released, followed by John, who immediately gets arrested. Gus drives away with his prisoner, but Frank notices it's actually Lester wearing John's clothes. He laughs and lets them go. Inside, John and Denise are watching the surgery. Frank comes in but waits until the transplant is confirmed to be successful before arresting John. For the next few days, all TV and radio shows continue to discuss the incident, calling out the system for causing this in the first place. 3 months later, the long trial is finally over and the jury finds John guilty of only 2 of 3 charges. The sentence will probably be 3 to 5 years, but good behavior will probably get him down to 2. John hugs Denise and tells Mike to take care of the family. Mike says goodbye to him, but John replies with "see you later." On his way out, Lester tells John that he's his hero and Mike thanks him for what he did as he's taken away.